Do you want to meet a podcast host?
No, I don't. I actually don't want to go meet a host
Bad news.
and go to a forbidden room.
Forbidden recording room.
Yeah. Oh. I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And you're listening to Deep Cut. On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Here we are at the halfway point in our kind of mini series on the films of Kiyoshi Kurosawa, the Japanese director, who's best known for directing horror and creepy movies that blend genre and art house. We have covered Cure as the popular pick. Ben brought in his popular pick with License to Live, and now here's my popular pick, 2001's ghost movie, Pulse.
So everything's popular? Everything's popular, Eli?
Did I say?
Yeah, I was like, is this a bit?
I was
confused. I was confused.
I mean, we can run with it. I'm sure they're all well received.
I don't think they're popular, but well received.
Oh my God, I'm leaving that in.
That was lovely.
I'll say it properly this time. Today we're talking about my deep cut pick, the 2001 internet ghost movie, Pulse, or Cairo. I love this movie so much. Before we unlock the forbidden room that is Pulse, if you are enjoying Deep Cut, please remember to give us a rating or a review and subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help others discover the show. You can also keep up with us at Deep Cut Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. And if you want to talk about this movie with us or any other film or TV or whatever, please join us on our Discord server where I promise you won't get haunted. If you're a big fan of the show, we've also recently launched a Patreon. And if you want to help support us there, it's the best way to support us, and proceeds from our Patreon go directly into the functioning of the show. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials that we have mentioned here. So in Pulse, it's the early 2000s, and a creepypasta-ish website starts asking the residents of Tokyo, would you like to meet a ghost? Ultimately luring them into forbidden rooms whose doorways are outlined in red tape where they do, in fact, meet ghosts. The sight of the ghost's faces throw those who see them into such a consuming physical despair that they create their own forbidden rooms and then perish either by their own hand or by fading into an ashy stain on the wall behind them. As this otherworldly crisis sweeps Tokyo, and it's implied the rest of the world, we follow a small collection of young, prospective characters, mainly Kumiko Aso's Michi, a plant salesperson, and Haruhiko Kato's Kawashima, an economics undergraduate student. Their queries rapidly shift from what's going on to how do we save those who we care about to how do we save ourselves? So I love this movie. I saw it for the first time almost 2 years ago, and you can hear a little bit of my reaction to it from my summer 2022 diary. I'll drop in a little clip here. You'll hear how creeped out I was. I don't think this movie thinks life is worth living. It's probably the most compelling vision of a ghost that I've seen. I don't mean just visually, though also that, but also what ghosts would do to humans, the despair that they would create. I mean, I'm both a little unnerved to be in the dark right now because I'm watching this at night, and I'm also feeling like deflated. Man. What did you two think of this movie? When did you first see it?
When did I first see this?
Oh, give me a second.
I think shortly after you recommended it, I did see it. And then I think that was also around the same time I saw like Cure. I think that was only why I saw at the early parts of me looking at Kurosawa's work. Yeah, what do I think about this movie? The movie is a weird one. Like, it's so strangely constructed, but I think the creepiness is really strong in a way that I cannot explain because it's doing the internet as malevolent force, I guess, in a very simple, stripped back way and in a very early stage of the internet. And somehow I think
Yeah.
Kurosawa and his team have a very strong understanding of what is creepy about screens and like this whole idea that you see yourself on your own screen and you're forced to look at it and you're like, where's the camera? That's disconcerting for sure. And I think it's really, it kind of saw the future a little bit. Not in terms of like maybe what technology is going to become or like how we plug into technology, but how technology makes us feel. So rather than being bogged down with details, it's just like about feelings, like about how, I guess maybe how the modern world is shifting in terms of how we relate to each other. So I think he had a really strong kind of prescience about that. Way back in like what, 2000-ish? When was this again? When did this come out?
Yeah, he would have been writing and developing it
2001.
maybe even a little bit before 2000.
And I'm like, damn, world of dial-up. Who would have thought the hellscape we live in now?
You know, sometimes Kiyoshi's right on the ball with that one. But for me, Pulse was the very first Kiyoshi Kurosawa film I saw. I'm looking on my letterbox and I logged it on April 17th, 2020. So 4 years ago. I think it sort of matched my expectations when I saw it for the first time because I was like, oh, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Japanese horror, like you get what you get. And I think out of the 3 films that we've seen so far, even like compared to Cure, this is like the most like flat out horror film of his that we've seen. Like it really, it's like building of fear and dread. It has its jump scares. It has like the classic bits, but I think Kurosawa is able to just hold you in that realm of fear for a really long time and doesn't really let you breathe. And I think in some cases, some directors, when they do that, you sort of just get taken out because it's like too much. But I think the world and the way the characters are acting and sort of the confusion around it is fascinating enough to keep you hooked. And that's what I really loved about this. I also, on this watch, what really stood out to me was the production design. And I think I want to talk about, I guess, across the board, how strong it's been in building, I guess, character, but also tone. So production design as tone setting. And this is basically like maybe predates like the creepypasta. Like I think maybe this birthed a lot of things for modern horror related to internet usage. I'm thinking about like maybe Jane Schoenberg's work, like some other modern horror filmmakers. There is a lot of like linkage there. And I love the accuracy of the computer production that was in the film. And I sort of loved that it was like an ensemble piece because that definitely relates to the theme of the film and how it's sort of societal rather than just individual. But I want to talk about a few different characters and a few different scenes. But this was great. I really, really enjoyed my rewatch.
Excellent.
Do you talk about how you felt about it, Eli? I don't think you did.
Did I?
No, I don't think so. I'm going to tee you up.
Yeah, I guess I'll drop in a little clip, but I guess.
Oh yeah, that's the.
Oh yeah, he was gonna drop in his reaction. Right. But I want to hear what else you felt about on the rewatch.
Yeah, good question. One of the major frequent slights against this movie is that it does a lot of expositional explanation of what the ghosts are and what they're doing and what they want. But I remember clocking on my first viewing that the final big scare of the movie frustrates any theorizing that the graduate student from earlier in the movie does, right? That there's something else going on. I really like that the movie breaks its own rules. On rewatch, I'll say that whereas on the first viewing, I was totally creeped out, edge of my seat, the entire runtime, not knowing what to expect next. I did know what to expect this time, so it lost some of that glimmer. But I still think it's so thoroughly done, and I felt more attached to the performances this time. there's a lot of distant camera work, right? But there's really a lot to hold on to in how the different characters that you're mentioning, Wilson, navigate this situation in different ways. And I'm sort of thinking about that cross-sectional study of how different people react to ghosts coming back through the computers. So yeah, I think I'm thinking about new things.
Yeah. And I love how, like, I guess the selection of characters, I guess it makes sense because they're all internet users, but they're like young adults.
true,
Like,
yeah.
I think that made it more fun, even though, like, by the end of the film, everyone has been affected by it. But I love how it was like the folks that typically would be discovering the internet at that time.
Yeah, and the implication that it sort of trickles up the generations to the older people as well is somewhat prescient too.
It's because we're getting older.
And trickles down because, like, in the missing people, it was like a lot of old people and a lot of like children in that TV reporting cast scene.
When I think about the overarching theory of Kurosawa that I presented in our episode on Cure, that there's a big social pessimism to him, and that he presents that pessimism through a very sociological sweep. This one does it so well. And if he's really trying to show how weak our connections are, this movie about ghosts who are apathetic and are contagiously apathetic and despairing and isolated, it so effectively crumbles the entire world. It is apocalyptic in scale.
It is apocalyptic. I think it's interesting how Cure is about how it's so easy to be affected by others, so you go kill people. This is like, you're so easily affected by other people to go kill yourself, which is really dark. And it's an interesting kind of horror that is not really like something's trying to kill me. In a weird way, the connection is what kills you because the meeting of these isolated individuals is what is going to kill you, which is kind of interesting because yes, you're isolated, but then the reaching out to you as an isolated ghost is what is going to kill the other person. Is like, oh, okay. So is it good to be isolated or not?
Yeah, he really makes it a lose-lose. Totally. Well, as we're sort of wandering into what this movie is about, let me give you a little bit of context that is partially just kind of interesting and partially will keep our attention on a couple of specific elements. So on the more interesting side, just random, Miramax purchased the distribution rights to this movie at Cannes in 2001 and didn't release it in the US ever. When the Weinstein brothers left Miramax to start their own company, Boo Hiss, Magnolia bought the rights to Pulse and released it in the US in 2005. So it was released 4 years after and was continuing to ride on the wave of J-horror that was popular in the US at the time. Kurosawa mentions that Ring was a big inspiration on this, and he says that he stole some elements, but it's a little different. And he also mentions that The Grudge, coming out after this, helped sustain the wave of his career entirely and helped him continue to make horror movies. So it's interesting that he contextualizes himself within this broader wave of J-horror because there are things about this that are distinct. It's, again, kind of the narrative construction, whereas those movies are focusing on one or two main characters, this really looks at multiple people across an age group.
Once again, fuck you, Harvey Weinstein. I hope you rot.
Mm-hmm. An appropriately recurring refrain on our podcast.
It's sort of crazy how pervasive he has been in like international cinema of that era. Yeah, like how much power he wielded. It's kind of wild.
And really how much damage he did, especially to the exhibition of East Asian cinema in the US. Thinking about the way that he recut movies.
Oh, yeah.
May he be reconvicted. We're recording this right after his conviction in New York was overturned, so...
Kind of fucking why? Like, yeah, why? That's all I'm asking. Why?
I want to give us a couple of things to hold in mind about the ghosts in this movie from what Kurosawa says in various interviews. He talks about old Kaidan films, you know, movies from the 50s and beyond that are based on even older ghost stories from all the way back to Kabuki theater and beyond. This is a trend that sort of stops in the 70s, or diminishes. And something important that Kurosawa says, because he was watching these movies as a kid, he says, quote, "They are not violent ghosts. The ghosts just show up and sit in the corner of the room to tell you how vengeful they feel, but they don't act on that. They just want to tell you that they're vengeful, then they just sit there." So it is an updating of that. It's a modernized version of something that existed in Japanese storytelling cycles a long time ago, end quote.
It's interesting because we talk about how he doesn't really do scares and jump scares. Like in Cure as well, which is kind of a horror thriller movie. It's not really something where like, it's not trying to set your heart pounding or racing by making something come at you. It's just stuff is happening and it's like slowly building. And I think based on this, you can kind of understand where he's coming from. And I totally get it because in a sense, he is holding back catharsis from the scare.
Yeah.
Because when you watch like a modern, like trashy horror movie from Hollywood, the scare is actually the fun part. Because there's the part where you scream and then you laugh and then you're like, okay.
It's the release.
Yeah, the release. But by not releasing, you're always just like, fuck is going on? And you're waiting for it to happen and it just never does. And it never really happens in this film. It is really dreadful. And the scariest parts for me are really slow scenes and they're just like creepy as fuck. But it's never like coming at you in a way that is so quick or violent that you really get that immediate fear release. You don't. Yeah. So they really get under your skin in that way.
It's like a mounting feeling of, oh no, just this awful dread. And also the way the scale levels up to be the entirety of Tokyo and Japan and the world just feels so bleak. Very little catharsis. On that note, he also says, quote, "I find ghosts in Japanese horror much more terrifying. In the standard American horror canon, because a ghost violently attacks you or comes after you, at least you have the chance to fight back. And what you're fighting for is the idea that you can beat the bad thing and go back to the good old days when you were peaceful and happy and there weren't any ghosts hanging around. But if they don't attack you, then the best you can do is figure out a way to coexist with them. I find the idea that one just has to live with this thing much more terrifying. You have no chances of running away or fighting it. You're stuck with it forever," end quote.
Yeah.
This is exactly what you're saying, Ben.
I've been kind of turning around this idea in my head, which is just an idea, but I don't know how to really fully flesh it out, which is that when it comes to more standard horror, like Hollywood / like even maybe trashier horror from like other countries as well.
Like other international horror movements like Giallo as well.
Sure, yeah. Like I think the direction that these films take, like the way that they kind of construct them is always like, okay, what's scary? Like what is the monster? So in a way, the directors / writers or whatever, they're coming up with an idea because they're trying to think about what would scare people. So in a way, the direction comes from the point of view of a monster. Like what can I do to scare the character / audience? But I think with the way that Kurosawa is working, he's thinking, what am I afraid of? So kind of coming from the point of view of the character, thinking about like what their fears are. And those things don't have to be things. They can be like their feelings and the isolation or whatever, or the feelings of loneliness. It's a very kind of fine distinction, but I feel that way when I look at the way that he approaches it, because the monsters don't really have a point of view here, I feel, and you don't really understand. And they're kind of scary in a way that taps into more internal psyches and fears that the characters have. So I find the approach to be different, but I'm not sure if that totally makes sense, but it's just like a feeling.
It does. I want to tweak it a little bit. If you're citing a distinction between the typical horror monster, which is designed to invoke, if not an intellectual, broad kind of terror, then a specific, like bodily, horrifying, visceral fear, maybe Kurosawa's ghosts are driving at what depresses you. I remember feeling so low after the first time I watched this movie because it is such a bleak ending. We'll talk about sort of everything that these characters lose across the course of the movie, but the ghost's apparent apathy is a crucial component of this. He's not talking about a ghost that is angry or even really wants something. These ghosts are just there and they get under your skin and they leech you dry and they change who you are. Think about the costuming, which goes from colorful to white, vacant to black, just nothingness. So in addition to the design of the ghosts, one other thing, of course, is where the internet was in 2001 is an important thing to keep in mind. He says, quote, At the time I wrote this film, the internet was just starting to become popularized. It was before anybody really had a full idea of what effect it was going to have on our daily lives. Through the power of marketing, it just spreads all over. In the case of Japan, to just so many households. I think at the time it was just kind of this unknown force that was spreading like a virus throughout the country and had that kind of ominous and menacing feel to it. 5 years later, clearly the internet and its use in our lives has kind of stabilized as part of the infrastructure. But I think you could talk about the threat of technology in terms of nuclear power. Before we have a handle on what it really means, we are seduced by its potential power, and it very quickly can spread beyond our ability to contain it. I think technology presents that kind of problem, end quote. And also to keep in mind that mobile phones are really just starting in 2001. They can't send pictures at this point.
Yeah.
The technology for it is being spoken about, and there are some prototypes, but it is not very publicly available. People receive creepy photos on their phones in this movie, crucially. He says, quote, "This film was made during that transitional period with social media. The internet, which is the subject of the film, is actually a replacement for old-fashioned telephones or letters. We thought people who communicated via those media tools must be loners. Since they don't have friends to meet up with, they make phone calls or write letters or browse the internet. That's just how we used to think at that time." End quote.
What's interesting about the way that we see the internet being used here is that actually I realize we never really see much communication aside from the "do you want to meet a ghost?" Like we never see them like use a chat room. We never see them like browse anything. It's just like those creepy videos, like they come up immediately, and that's all we understand the internet to be is creepy videos that you have no control over. Like he never gives you a scene where somebody uses the internet in a normal way. Like every single time you see it, it's kind of messed up.
I interpret those videos as more like live streams.
Yeah, I mean, I do too.
Which is maybe imposing too modern of a take on it, but
No, but I think he was sort of projecting the future or predicting the future in this one, because like you could like sort of click to different rooms and see what I guess all the ghosts are doing, and you get to pick your ghost for this afternoon.
Like it's social in that it's not a mutual communication with live streaming, right? It's a one-way parasocial, paranormal relationship. Yeah, so that is interesting.
Ooh.
Like there's no back and forth communication happening in this movie on the computers. I think it's I'm not saying it's a choice, I'm saying it's an omission that's clear. That it's just not there. It makes the internet scarier as well, I think.
that kind of helps me unlock one of the questions I have about this movie. That moment when Haruo is in her apartment and sees, as Wilson brought up, the image of herself on the computer screen. And then she goes and finds the source of the camera, which is off in her bedroom. And it is just seems to be the film camera itself that Kurosawa is wielding. And she embraces it and goes to kiss it and says, "I'm not alone." And she smiles. So if it is parasocial, paranormal, which I love then there's something about it that fuels the need to reach out and make it feel like a connection, which ultimately fails and makes it worse.
If you think about the parasocial thing, it is maybe part of the epidemic of loneliness in sweeping the world right now, which is that you feel connected to people, but you're actually not connected. And so, in a way, maybe Haruo is connected to the ghosts, but they're ghosts. They're not real people. And that's what is kind of maybe her path to her downfall, is because she feels like she is surrounded by people, but she's not. Yeah, and that's like some real shit that's very relevant to the world today.
That is. I think Kurosawa knew about, I guess, these sort of like interactions that you can have on the internet. And I think he made a conscious decision not to do that and rather like physicalize that sort of diving into an internet wormhole and getting consumed by it into what is like the horror element of this film, which is what I thought was really great.
Which most frequently happens in those forbidden rooms marked by red tape, right?
Yes, making that choice to go in.
Which are the scariest scenes for you guys?
I love that question. You go first, Wilson.
When I like stopped it, well, I didn't stop the movie. The movie's still running, but I texted them. Oh my, well, I don't forgot what exactly I texted the group when I was watching. Don't text while you watch movies. Like I said last week, don't stop a movie halfway. But I said, I was just like, oh my God, it's so scary. That's what I said. God damn, I forgot how scary this was. That was the scene where Yabe goes and tries to investigate, like after he gets the phone image, and then that's the first time that we see someone take out the tape and go into the room, and he sees that woman in the room, and she starts dancing towards him, and he's behind the couch, and then he looks under the couch and he doesn't see any legs, so he thinks he's fine. And then he looks up, and then there's this really slow, I would say it's like a medium close-up of the woman's face starting to just go over the top of the couch. And that's that. Ooh, ooh.
It's really creepy. That's the same one that I think was maybe the most terrifying part of the film. It's the first time you really see a ghost, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's so unexplained, and she moves so slowly towards the camera when you first see her, and you're like, And I love this choice when she, I think after 3 very slow steps, she does this hobble and then she bends over. That shit is freaky, man. It's not even like a very body horror thing. It's just the motion is so creepy because it's not human or not typical. It's just unexpected, and it's so slow that it really gets under your skin because it doesn't feel normal. And I think about all those shots of computer screens of people in their rooms alone, and how they're also well pitched to be creepy as well, because they look human, but the things they do are just like slightly off because they're just repeating something that is just so like alien, and then they just keep doing it, you know? They're like in this fugue state, and you know something's freaking wrong, and they really figure out what's creepy about these very simple things.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the through line that I was talking about. Like Kurosawa loves getting his actors to do like physically do weird and unexpected shit on camera, and that's what he just into.
And it works. I believe that ghost in the first Forbidden Room, which Yabe goes into, I believe that's a movement artist, and they did not film that in slow-mo, even though it looks like slow motion. And she just sort of does that stumble very gracefully, I believe.
I can still see in my head, I'm like, this is whack. If I see that somebody do that in person, I will die.
Very memorable.
The lighting of it is like so great, and I think the barren room, like compared to how full Takuchi's room feels in the scene before, when he goes into the Forbidden Room and how like barren that is, and there's sort of just like no room to run, and B, I don't know what B is, but it's freaky. It's freaky. Like they're just like, and I think it's back to what we were saying about how Kurosawa establishes space so well, but with horror you think about, oh, like what would I do in this situation, like, oh, I could use this to like block myself or whatever, like that's what I think when I'm like in horror moments. But like with this full understanding of a space and like a realization that, okay, there's really like you can't go anywhere, that's it, you're cornered, that's it freaks me out.
This is something that comes up in Cure too, where the further you go into a space, the more susceptible you are to become consumed by what lies in that space. In Cure, it's when the detective Takabe goes and interviews Mamiya within the jail building, within this hallway, within the cell, within the corner at the back of the cell, and the room at the back of the corner of the back of the cell. And here, it's Taguchi's apartment. It's those forbidden rooms. The further you go in, the more penned in you are, and things can take advantage of your mind in there.
I think on related to that, from a shot perspective, he's always interested in what's happening in the room in the back. He keeps doing that. It's like, there's some shit going on in the room in the back. You know, there's a doorway and it's like, the light's off. What's there? And that's really, I think, something he does across a lot of his films. Like he likes that kind of deep space, and then he'll hide things there.
Yeah, he does.
Or then he'll start exploring that space. And it's interesting like how that's the thing that's scary. what's in the back.
Whoever chose that sheer plastic curtain in Taguchi's room, or it's the production designer Tomoyuki Mauro and the set decoration who is Yuji Kasamura, who probably made that choice to have a sheer plastic curtain covering and sort of like, I said, glazing over anything behind the curtain. So if you see a figure behind it, you don't know who it is, but you see a figure. And it like happens multiple times in the film.
Yeah.
But in the first scene where Michi goes in and she sees Taguchi behind it, it's like, I'm so scared.
And talk about another touch point comparison to Cure, because in Cure, there's that weird moment towards the end in the mountain lodge where there's a blurry, obscured photo sitting behind a sheer plastic translucent shower curtain.
Yeah.
So this seems to be an object that comes up again and again in Kurosawa's creepy movies.
I think it's like this thing that you feel the presence of, but you can't see. I mean, your review, your first review of Pulse is really interesting when you talk about how there's the curiosity for the scary stuff. And
my review?
Yeah, your review, talk about how there's this curiosity for the...
Oh,
I can't remember what the words you use were, but it's like this. Okay, I'm going to pull it up. It'll be easier.
Is it like the compulsion to know?
Compulsion to know, yes, something like that. I'm going to go pull it up.
It's very Gothic, right? A key component of Gothic literature is the desire to go further and know, this compulsion to try and understand the thing that ultimately you fail to grasp. That's very much so at play here.
And I think it's the thing that draws you in, but it's also the thing that's going to kill you. And you call it the death drive, the impulse of the death drive from Freud, and also this curiosity about obliteration. So it's quite a fascinating thing because, the thing is scary, but you kind of really want to know. And so many of the ghosts are these dark, like shrouded in darkness figures that you can't really see the faces of. And even at the end, I was like, oh, wow, this ghost is Kawashima. I was like, oh, yeah. I just realized it near the end. I was like, oh, he's here.
That bridges nicely into my scariest moment. I'm always perturbed when a calm domestic space is corrupted by not so much a jump scare, but something that is in the house and changes to become scary. So like the tall man in It Follows appearing from the hallway, one of my all-time favorite scares. Here, it's when Michi has brought Junko in from her own forbidden room, and she's maybe recovering in Michi's apartment, but not so much recovering. In the morning, she stares at Michi working at the sink. We watch them both from behind their heads, and we can't see either of their faces. This movie's obsession with the back of people's heads is like the evil inverse of Yi Yi, where Yi Yi sees positivity in the back of people's heads. Kurosawa sees terror. So Junko gets up and she looks out the window and she says something about, am I going to die this way? And Michi says, no, you're good. You're fine. Chill. And then Junko walks across the room away from the window and just comes to rest standing in front of the wall, back to the wall, and the light just goes out on her. And in the moment when you realize what's happening, it cuts to Michi, and you don't see Junko turn into a stain, but you know what has happened. This is within the domestic space of Michi's apartment. It's her trusted, closest friend, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And it all just slips away in an instant. Not in a jump scare cut, not in a cut in, but in a cut away. Something changes, and then we cut away, and we know it's too late. I love that scare so much. It really just feels like it's sucking something out of my body when I see it.
I would say, I personally think that the first half of this movie is some of Kurosawa's best work. And I think when we sort of go further into the mystery and layers start getting peeled away, and then Kawashima and Michi sort of finally get together, it sort of, I wouldn't say it loses steam, but I think without the creepiness factor to it as strong as it was in the first half, it doesn't feel as repulsive to me or as engaging to me. That's just speaking personally. I think the first half with all the confusion and you seeing all these characters getting affected by it really, really works for me. I was just wishing it sort of maintained that till the end.
I think it's because once you lose the domestic setting, once you go into the actual post-apocalypse, and now you're on the road, then in a way, scary stuff fits in the landscape. But within that home, the scary stuff is scarier because you're at home, like on the computer and stuff.
Yeah.
But then once you are outside in the car and stuff, then it's like, okay, if I see something crazy, it's because I'm in a freaking scary-ass warehouse. Of course, I'm going to see crazy stuff. Yeah, so I think maybe that's like a contextual thing. I do find the post-apocalyptic nature of the film really fascinating from a cultural standpoint, I guess, because I mean, right now we are in a lot of post-apocalyptic content. Fallout is big now.
Yeah.
People really like Last of Us. These are also video games.
I thought you just meant in society.
Yeah.
But okay, you're talking about media.
Yeah, but as in like in terms of the things that people are interested in terms of the content they're consuming, right? But then if you think about anime also loves post-apocalypse. They've been doing it forever, which makes a lot of sense in the Japanese context because of the bombs. And I was thinking about how, in a weird way, Japan has already lived their post-apocalypse and they're still living it.
Okay, so this brings up something important, which is Kurosawa says, quote, "It's about a desire to destroy. It's not very interesting destroying countryside, but cities are full of artificial stuff. So you feel they might end up destroyed someday. I probably feel this way because I'm Japanese. I mean, cities in Japan, such as Tokyo, have been destroyed roughly once every 50 years. Most destruction happens typically through earthquakes, then war comes next. Tokyo's been sustained for the last 70 years, but it's constantly said that it's in danger and about to collapse." End quote. And also, just worth noting that my immediate association with the stains on the wall that the ghosts leave behind is the atomic shadow from the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And the late scene when she goes to get the boat key from the boathouse, he changes it a bit where he doesn't just show stains, he shows like figures in dust. Very similar to what you will see in Pompeii. Those figures, those, I don't know how to explain it, but essentially people dying in a volcano eruption. But through that death, it leaves this encased kind of figure of the person and the body, which changes the visual language of the film, but also maybe pushes it closer towards these kind of apocalypse scenarios.
Yeah, of the very literal kind which Japan has experienced. It's interesting that he links that cycle of apocalypse, no matter the scale, to the rise of technology, which is often seen as a post-war boon of Japan's economy. But here, it's the device by which Japanese society at the level of the personal, the interpersonal, the communal, and the broadly social at large are all ripped to shreds.
Also, I think in this age, I was reading somewhere where in the time that they were making this movie, the whole hikikomori kind of phenomenon is also starting to get more traction in the news. And that's like the phenomenon of people being very isolated and like staying in their homes and having very little social contact. So that's also kind of dovetailing with technology because you only stay at home because you have technology, because you can stay at home and go on forums and like play video games all day.
It's interesting that Kurosawa contrasts this with the workplace that most of the characters congregate at, which is sunny plant sales.
Yes.
I always find that to be such a funny little detail. Like, why are they plant salespeople? Like, it's so random.
And why do they need a floppy disk? Like, what is so important about a floppy disk to a plant sales like company?
It's their spreadsheets, bro. Their sales.
Visually, the greenery is certainly a rich contrast to the later monochrome of the movie.
But even with the greenery, it feels so sterile. Like the area, like whenever you're in that space, and also with the sound design, with like the very strong ADR that like really takes you for a loop. I think that like immediately when you start the film and nothing's supposed to be off, you're already like clocked in. You're like, something's not right here with the way that these characters are like present, like saying their dialogue, and also this space.
Actually, the way they process Taguchi's death is really weird.
Yeah. They're really bad at consoling each other.
They're like really kind of chipper, even like in the immediate aftermath. I'm like,
Yeah.
you just saw this man kill himself. And she's like, Junko's like, yeah, you'll get over it. It'll be fine. Like, what?
Junko's like, oh, why are you sad? Oh, it's still about Taguchi? Oh, it'll be okay.
Like, bro.
They even say, like, I don't know what he was so depressed about. I think even at this point when ostensibly the community has not been torn apart yet, there's notes that even then they're not really connected to each other. You know, Michi very prominently has a scene with her mom where she talks about how she won't talk to her dad and the parents are divorced and the dad lives nearby, but she doesn't go to see him. And Kurosawa is definitely interweaving commentary about the nature of friendship and family, that they're very fragile to begin with. The boss has that whole pessimistic screed about, oh, friendships always take it so that when you say something, their feelings are hurt. That's the way it always is. And it's like,
Don't hang out with your friends. Like, oh, okay, dude.
okay, bro. Sounds like you're projecting, but okay. Yeah, it's really unstable to begin with. Even the fact that there's this greenhouse on top of a high-rise building with a view of the city horizon in the background and all the smog, and it's nowhere near the earth where they're growing plants for real.
Yeah.
It's off.
It is really off. I think the spaces in this film are so distinct. Like, what I will retain, I think, from all these Kurosawa films that we watch, maybe years down the line, is the spaces that he creates. Like, I'm thinking about like the computer room that Kawashima goes into and meets Harue for the first time, and how there's like rows of monitors, or even like when he goes to where she works and he meets where the grad student is, like the cables dangling from the ceiling. They're all such distinct spaces, and even though like horror elements don't happen in those spaces, the potential for horror is always there,
which is part and parcel with this social weakness that he wants to point out, that there's always the potential to confront this underlying fear. In this movie, it's the fear that we're all going to die, and there's nothing to do about that. Kawashima successfully ignores that through the run of the movie up to a point. And even he falls prey to it. Poor, sweet himbo Kawashima.
He only survives because he's an idiot.
Yeah.
He's just like, yeah, I don't do computers. And that's how he survives.
I love how he says that multiple times whenever they start explaining something. Oh, no, I'm not a computer guy. I'm not a computer guy.
It's like, yeah, I need to write this down.
Well, first you click. What's clicking?
Yeah. Also, I think maybe another shout out is like the sound design, as always with Kurosawa films, is really strong to establish that dread in very simple ways, like just like those like slow drones where things are just happening, or like the way that the "help me" is mixed, the many times you hear it. Yeah.
Oh, it's so close to the microphone. It's so scary. What is it? Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
But okay, I have not an issue. I want to pick your guys' brain about this, because this is the first film that we've watched where the score is quite, I would say, heavy-handed in certain scenes. What do you think about that? I think from a horror perspective, it really works for me, but I think it could take you away from what's going on in the film, or like just being immersed in it. Like, I think at times it felt very heavy-handed.
I agree. I think in particular, I thought about this towards the end of the movie when they're fleeing by car, and it's playing this Bernard Herrmann kind of strings amped up adventure music, and that felt a little at odds. And then, you know, with the vocal choir going,
Yeah, I like that.
it makes me think of like 2001. So it's maybe a little distracting.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that didn't really age well for me.
I like it. I think it's fine.
Okay, if it worked for you, Ben, I'm happy for you.
You know what shouldn't age well, but I like a lot, is the more kind of scrappy digital effects. You know what it reminds me of, Ben?
What?
Is the very purposefully digital looking effects in Twin Peaks: The Return.
Okay.
It looks uncanny, and only in a way that could exist on video. It could not look this way in any other medium.
It's like when Junko becomes a stain and then the stain disappears and then like flies away. And it's like clearly video and like CGI.
Yeah.
But I think it works in the context of what this is, which is dial-up internet. So we understand that visual language.
Agreed.
So it was probably unplanned, but because that's just maybe how good it could look at the time. But it really works in its favor to keep it relevant, but within its time. So if it looked better, it would step too much into uncanny valley kind of territory where you're like, yeah, this looks good, but it's not perfect. But now it's like, oh, it looks kind of almost campy in a weird way. But I know it's not real, but I can buy into it because of the context that we're in. So that's really interesting. Probably not a choice, but works in its favor, I think.
Even the golden eyes on the final ghost, I love that shot where it's phasing in and out and it looks wrong. And then the golden eyes open towards the end.
That's the part where he walks to the foreground of the frame and he blocks the ghost and you think he's going to turn around and the ghost is going to be gone. No, it's like, the ghost is still there, bro.
It's so creepy how slow that shot goes and how slow his movement is. It's just like, move, show us, don't show us.
What do y'all make of I was reading the interview where he pairs this film with Toby Hooper's, my God, what's the name of the film? Life Force. Where he pairs the film with Toby Hooper's Life Force, and then he talks about how, in a weird way, I don't think he says weird way, but in a way, the film tends towards a love story by the end.
That once again pivots me back towards Kurosawa's social argument. Because if people aren't getting a genuine kind of love from family, friends, workplace, community, city, etc., which he's showing as weak from the beginning, then the only place to turn is fake sources of empty calorie love. In Cure, this is psychosis. In Pulse, it's clinging on to something that's already gone. Hanging on to Kawashima's ghost is where Michi says she finally has found happiness. That word is so crucial. Like, what's the thing that's going to sustain you in the face of all this chaos around you, even if it's something that is extremely unhealthy? Again, social pessimism, but that's how I read it.
I don't know. I was like, that's like the crux of the film, right? They want to find, and connection will be or being together is the antidote to what is whatever is consuming the nation or consuming the world. But in the end, I think it's still like everyone's still alone. Like Eli said, she's clinging on to something. But I don't know what to make of that final voiceover where she's like, that's my friend or something like that. Like, I'm holding on to you or something like that.
I think that's Michi losing finally. She keeps it cool for most of the film, despite all the horrors that she sees.
She does.
And I think by the end, she finally loses it. And I think that's bleak for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
On a boat with Mr. Yakusho,
who clearly hasn't seen a computer in his life.
He's got to show up. This man loves boats. You know, another useful analog is a kaidan that Kurosawa cites in one of his interviews that I looked into. It's called Yotsuya Kaidan. It's about the ghost of a wife who comes back, and when she appears to her husband, the husband dies of terror. And then in death, they're reunited and are together. And depending on how the story is told, it ends different ways. Sometimes they ascend to heaven together. But this idea that in life, he's so scared of her form that he dies. And then once he dies, there's a permanent togetherness that they achieve. That's both comforting and bleak. Maybe that's something that Kurosawa is driving at here.
It's interesting because I can see that in a digital space, but he kind of makes that more physical in the way that he depicts the horrors. When you think about the stain, shadows, where yes, the internet is a big theme in this, but he is using it more like a parallel with the other things that are happening in this film, which are more physical with actual people. Yeah, but I think about how this is about digital ghosts. Like what happens when you die and your digital footprint is still on the internet. So you could still imagine yourself to be alive, right? But you're not. So you're not there. But then because there's this trail that's much more permanent than actual things you leave behind, because these things deteriorate, but your digital footprint might disappear, but it won't deteriorate on its own. It will just maybe be deleted, which is fine. But there's this kind of slow death on the internet. You think about how people, when it comes to their parasocial relationships, are able to leave like messages on like people's old posts when they like doing the RIP stuff, and it's like, oh, maybe like really old posts, or like when they see old content from creators they like who have passed away, then it's you're still connected to something that happened when they were alive. But yeah, it's I don't really have a point here, but it's just this kind of relationship with this slow death that he's doing in Pulse.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that's just not present in that time, right? Like social media or like building sort of a life online or a persona online that will live, I guess, forever or until a server is cut. He didn't know that was going to happen, but yeah, there's a strong link.
That definitely is part of his intent in terms of effect, though. In another interview, he says, quote, "In film, death is often confined to a few seconds, whereas in Pulse, I tried to make it last to turn death into a state. I tried to represent this passage from life to death in an enduring way," end quote. And I think elsewhere, he even describes this not even as a death, kind of. People become ghosts from the living state without having died.
Because in the end, the kind of theory in the film is that the ghosts seep into our realm through the internet. Which is like the wildest shit ever on paper. You're like, what? Yeah. But I think the reason why Kurosawa has been able to so-called predict the emotional landscape of our world now, it's not because he was trying to, but because he just focused on the feelings of people. And yes, the world has changed technology-wise, but people still feel the same way. So because he focused on the feelings, those things held water from when the film was released until up to today, which is why it has remained relevant rather than trying to think about the world in the future in a sci-fi way. Like what are the things that we're going to see? But by focusing on emotion and feelings, and that helps it retain relevance.
You know, in that same part where he talks about telephones and letters on the internet being part of a continuous thread, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of how being a loner hasn't changed across time, and that it means that you're free, but then you're not beholden to others. You're not connected to others. If you're a loner, you don't have those responsibilities, but you don't have that care. And there's both the desire to have that independence, but you lose something significant when you become disconnected. He does tap into that feeling really well, Ben. I agree. Compulsion and consequence of that compulsion.
I had a thought, which is that the ending is kind of like The Leftovers. Just a random thought. I was just thinking about it. I didn't make the connection, I think, the last time I saw it. But then when I was watching it this time, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of like the premise of The Leftovers. And like what happens when you're left behind and people just disappear and you don't know where they went, you know, and then how that affects the people who are left behind. I haven't fully thought it through.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
But The Leftovers is great.
It's so good. It's so good. And it's always like, I feel like so many media like is always about like what's happening. And Leftovers is like truly about the fallout and like how people feel about the fallout from something. And it's just, very much focuses in on that. And that's why it's just so damn good.
The best storytellers know consequences are important.
Yeah, it's true. The consequences are more important than like the what. Yeah.
They are.
Because that's more fascinating to kind of explore rather than trying to go through plot.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the plot of Pulse, there's not much of a plot. You know, it's just like stuff is going on.
Yeah.
And it's creepy and shit's going down. And these people feel bad. That's Pulse. Like it's so difficult to summarize into like what's going on. Like you read the summary on Letterboxd, not really what the film is, what's happening on, you know what I mean? Yeah.
It's not. It's a vibe. It's a sad vibe.
Are we continuing on a sad vibe next week?
What's next week?
Boys, it's your pick, Ben.
It's me again.
Oh, yeah.
Tokyo Sonata is fun and comedic and also a little sad.
Okay.
Like,
I'm ready.
have I seen a happy Kurosawa film? no. But
Will he ever make a happy film? Who knows?
yeah, has this guy made a film that's not freaking bleak? Like, I do think has some optimism.
I feel like License to Live was like there were moments there.
It's been a while since I've seen Tokyo Sonata, so I need to rewatch it and remind myself. But I do remember it being funny.
License to Live was really funny.
Yeah, I'll mention this again when we record, but the interesting factoid about Tokyo Sonata is that it's written by an Australian man, like a white Australian man,
Huh.
who lived in Japan and then like wrote about what he was seeing, and then Kurosawa directed it, which is really fascinating when you have an outsider from your country write the story. A little teaser for you for the next episode.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show and helps others discover the show as well. Please be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. You can also join us to talk about movies on our Discord server. We also now have a Patreon. If you want to support us, that's the best way, and we would deeply appreciate it. Proceeds from our Patreon go directly back into the functioning of the show. So you can click on the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here. Deep Cut is produced and hosted by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. This episode was edited by Bouchard, and our cover art is designed by Justina Yam. Our theme song is composed by me, Eli Sands.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.